Goals are the end of a strategic process, not the start of it. The start of a strategic process is, what's our mission? What change are we trying to bring into the world? What change are we trying to bring to customers? What's our strategy? What are the competitive advantages that we have that lead to a really rigorously logical plan that helps us achieve that mission? What's our roadmap? So, what are the pieces that we need to put in place to achieve that strategy and that mission? And then finally, what are our goals? What is the evidence that the strategy that we put in place was the right strategy because we were able to make
Mhm.
progress on things that we wanted to measure?
Welcome to the Great Life Experiment podcast. I'm your host, Monique Schaefer, and together we'll grapple with our messy, beautiful, and ever-changing personal and professional lives and the business world around us. I deeply believe there is no one right way to do this thing called life. Let's experiment together. As a quick reminder, friends, please note that this podcast is an independent production, and the information presented here and views expressed here reflect my personal opinion and do not reflect the views or positions of any organization or company that I'm affiliated with. Enjoy the episode. Hello, friends. Welcome to this week's episode of the Great Life Experiment podcast. I'm your host, Monique Schaefer. And today we are joined with Ravi Mehta. We have a wide-ranging conversation. Ravi is a senior product executive turned hands-on product advisor to high-growth consumer and AI startups. He has built and scaled product organizations with brands that have reached hundreds of millions of users. CPO of Tinder, product director Facebook for Gen Z engagement, VP of consumer products at TripAdvisor, early Xbox live stream team at Microsoft. He's managed large teams, 40 up to 70 PMs, while driving billion-dollar business growth. And now he is advising and partnering with founders to help them find their product market fit, their durable growth, and their AI advantage. He also has helped create Reforge, which is an online program for the product community to help them upskill and receive training. Ravi also helped to co-create Reforge's AI strategy program with Brian Belafort and also helped to create their product leadership program. That is how I first came to know Ravi and Ravi's work. And I'm so grateful that he took the time today to come on the show and he can share his wisdom, his frameworks, and things he's currently experimenting with as well. As a brief reminder, friends, this is an independent production and the views expressed are my own views and the views of the guests are their own views. And sometimes we agree and we disagree, but they do not represent the views of any organization or company that I am affiliated with. Enjoy today's episode. Thank you, Ravi, for saying yes to this podcast. So I didn't tell you this ahead of time, but when I started my podcast, I made a list of like the top 20 people I wanted to talk to because they'd impacted my career. And you were on that list. So I'm
Oh,
so
that's
honored that
amazing.
you
Thank you.
said yes. And the work and how I first discovered your work, besides you had done an episode with Lenny's podcast, was through Reforge. That for people that don't know Reforge, I will, I'll put it in the show notes. But, how do we really upskill the product community in various roles? And at that time when I signed up, it was very product manager focused. And we were coming through and coming out of the pandemic. I had moved into management and I had taken over a team that I had been a team member of. And I had actually swapped roles with my former boss.
Okay.
We had that
Yeah, that's a
dynamic
really
and
hard situation.
massive organization change. It was one of those great work had been done, and we were just now in a massive pivot and redefining strategy and how do we get to that next level. So I have a team of people and I need to assess with where we are going now, what are people's strengths? Do I have the right people in the right seats? What do I need to pull out of them in terms of, from a professional development, skill strengths, and where do I have gaps? And so for Reforge, it was your product leadership course that
Awesome.
gave me the mental model and the framework to think about my team's strengths individually and then how to look at them as a whole. So that profoundly changed my career. And I have like senior leaders at Workday, they're like, after you took that course, like that accelerated your career. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
that's great. Oh, I'm really glad to hear it. That was definitely that course is a labor of love. So I felt like there wasn't anything quite like it out there in terms of being positioned not for product managers, but for product leaders, for people that are leading teams. So I'm
Yeah.
really glad it was valuable for you.
Yeah. So for people that they're like, "Well, I wanna know what this class is with product leadership," how would you describe it to people? I definitely have my experience of it where I it gave me a framework to think about the strengths and opportunities of individual people and not having an expectation that everybody was perfect at everything, but my job as a leader was to lean into those strengths. And how do you make sure I'm doing this with my hands for people watching on YouTube of, looking at a wheel of
Yeah.
competencies and making sure that you had a literally rounded team. And that was what I had took from it. But how would you describe the product leadership class and why did you create that?
So the main reason was there's a lot of really good leadership content out there, but it's pretty generalized, right? It's for any leader in any role. And I think product is a really unique leadership role. It's the only
Mhm,
role where or that I know of where you're a leader from day one. Somebody comes into their first product role and as an
mhm,
associate PM, they're expected to manage up, to work with their engineering product and design team, to work with other stakeholders in the business. And so it's an intrinsically a leadership oriented role and that
mhm,
evolves as a person gets more senior and has direct reports and takes on more scope of responsibility. And so even though there's a lot of really good generalized leadership content, there wasn't a lot specifically for product leaders in terms of how to think about the competencies of people on your team, how to think about building a talent roadmap, how to think about working with stakeholders, how to think about goal setting. So the reason we created the course was to say, okay, let's look at leadership specifically through the lens of product and define the things that are going to be really useful for product leaders who are operating who are in the middle of doing this, all the way from specifically like individual one-on-one, how do you give a person really great feedback
mhm,
that compounds over time. So it's not just that you're giving them feedback once and they're kind of responding to it, but it actually helps them develop the skills that they need all the way through to thinking about your team really holistically and strategically. And one of the concepts that we talk about in the program is as a PM, you have a product roadmap, which makes your product better over time. As a product leader, it's really important to have a talent roadmap that makes your team better over time. So those are some of the things that went into us thinking about, how do we put together a course that's going to help people in a really interesting leadership intensive role that's
mhm.
typically in a high performance organization where success is not just measured by your product, but also measured by the team that you're building and leading and nurturing.
Yeah. And what I thought was interesting, and it kind of coincided with some advice a mentor gave me as well, but in thinking about how you grow your talent in the organization, there can often be this trap of you make yourself so indispensable as the
Yeah.
leader and you don't pass enough I don't mean pass enough down in like just shoving stuff off your plate, but giving people those heat experiences and opportunities to grow into the work that you're doing. And I had a mentor of mine, and it was at a time that it was like, I like what I'm doing, and I feel like I can take on more in different teams, in different capacities, in different markets. And he's like, you are too valuable in what you are doing right now. Your number one job is to build your organization to succeed you. And so first it was how do you make them a working group? How do you make them a leadership group and make sure that you have a pipeline of successors? So now I hire with succession in mind in thinking how can I grow people and a lot of people are like, "Oh, my boss doesn't think about my career." I'm the person that I'm like, I'm mapping out 2 or 3 steps
Yeah, that's
ahead
great.
for you of like, how do we build that for you? So,
And that's really important for high performing companies. I think now, especially with all the conversation about AI and this idea that, PM is now best as an individual contributor role and PM should be building and it's the time of the super IC. I think as a tech industry, we often like short shrift the importance of leadership and
mhm,
management. And great companies do have strong leadership, and they have strong leadership pipelines that help people understand how to have a scope of responsibility that is above and beyond what they can individually contribute. What they can individually contribute is getting bigger and bigger thanks to AI, but that doesn't mean
mhm,
that we don't need people who can level up into leading a team and create a set of people that can succeed them and build a company as a system that can operate in and of itself, not just because of the talent that it has today, but because of the systems that help it find the talent for tomorrow and help those people find the right roles and take on the right level of responsibility.
In your career, I mean, you've seen quite a progression, and I love this story, right, that you fell in love with gaming. I think I
Yeah,
heard the
early
story,
on.
correct me if I'm wrong, but you were, like, 9 or 10 years old, and then the foray into then going to college, and then you had gone to Xbox and gaming for a while. You had been to, and I have it all written out because you've had quite a few jumps. So you had Xbox, then Facebook, being a CPO at Tinder, you had
Yep.
TripAdvisor, creating Outpace, helping launch Reforge. So you have seen different industries, different flavors, but high use of consumer apps, the shift to AI. That's quite a journey. So
Yeah.
one point I want to talk about your
I've got a lot of
career.
gray hair from it. So.
Mine's just died. I'm right there with you. So I know a lot of people listening are going to want to hear kind of your mental models and thinking about your own career pivots. But before we go specifically with your own transitions and sticking with, you had created the product leadership program with Reforge, right? Filling that need in the
Yeah.
market. And you are now co-creating programs around AI strategy. There's AI productivity, AI foundations under the Reforge portfolio. And right, you're talking about AI strategy and thinking about product leadership. So even in that several year journey from when you originally created the program to now, what's something that you used to believe that has had to fundamentally change because of AI? Or maybe it hasn't fundamentally changed, you double down on it, or there's a nuance to it. But I have a feeling there's
Yeah.
probably some things you've had to tweak.
I think the biggest one is I used to be a firm believer that product management should be a single track role. So engineering is a dual track role where you can advance in an organization either by taking on a broader scope of responsibility and managing people or by being a domain expert and really understanding your area and becoming a principal engineer or an architect. And I think what was really important about that is that sent the signal for companies that did this well that there was more than one way to progress. And if the thing that you wanted to do was build amazing software and be world class at that, that you could continue to grow in the organization and that
Mhm,
wasn't dead end. I used to feel very strongly that product was different, that it wasn't necessarily a dual track, that in order to progress in product, the nature of it is leadership. And so taking on a larger team and being able to have a broader scope of impact within the organization is really essential. And that creating sort of a second track of a principal product manager would often might work from a career ladder standpoint, but not really in terms of the depth there. There's a lot of depth in terms of different engineering disciplines. But
mhm,
I think that has changed. And I think AI is one of the things that is changing
mm,
that. It is much more important, I think, for PMs today to understand the AI technology, to be really close to it and to be experts in it,
mhm,
even if they're not doing the engineering work, because the nature of AI, because it's probabilistic, means that in order to properly product manage a product and understand how to deliver something that is high quality and that's really consistent, you have to understand how the technology works. And that could be something, that can be kind of big general generative AI expertise, or it could be like understanding how AI works
mhm,
specifically around trust and safety and getting really deep into that particular area. So now I think there is an opportunity for product managers to have a dual track role, for some people to say, I want to grow by growing my scope of influence and leadership within the organization. And for other
mhm.
people to say, no, I want to grow in terms of depth and I want to be a world class expert in this particular area of building this particular type of products. And I think one of the factors there is the depth of AI technology and how much runway that gives people to be really senior in that.
Are you seeing people that resist that mindset shift? The people that I know in my network are hungry, they wanna be relevant, they're
Yeah.
curious people, so I'm not feeling the resistance, at least within the product community. It's like, "I need to do this," and it's more of the, "How do I do this?" and maybe a little bit of fear of, "Am I going to be relevant? Can I make
Yeah.
this jump? Do I translate?" I don't know, are you experiencing that? Or do you see more resistance? What do you notice?
I think there's three buckets of people. I think the first people are AI enthusiasts. People are like, I really am excited about AI. I want to learn about it. I believe it's the future of product development, and they're really all in. The other is people who are AI curious, and for them there's a gap between what they feel like they could know and what they know today. And
Hmm.
sometimes for those folks there's a little bit of overwhelm or a little bit of fear, but given the right on ramp, they can really figure it out. I think companies that do a good job of helping those AI curious people move into AI enthusiasts are going
Hmm.
to benefit really significantly. And then I think that there are AI skeptics, and there's AI skeptics that are both, I think, for good reasons. People are like, yeah, I want to be realistic about what the technology is and is not capable of. And then there's people who are AI skeptics for fearful reasons that it's changing so much about their role and how they think about it that they're naturally skeptical of it because in part they fear what that means and how they have to evolve. So I really think it depends person to
Hmm.
person in terms of who's on your team and how to help them. And for the AI skeptics, I do think, if you're a company that is adopting AI, both in terms of how you work as well as in terms of the types of products that you're creating, and you have AI skeptics on the team, there might need to be, maybe they can find a role. Maybe there's some hard conversations. I think companies that want to be AI forward, that's part of the culture that they need to build. And then the skeptics need to figure out, are they on board with that, or do they
Hmm.
want to work elsewhere where that's not as much of a factor?
Are you finding with the skeptics that it's AI is more of a hype and how much value is it actually going to bring, or are you hearing more of the like ethical concern? Like I just recorded another episode, and she talked about she feels like there almost needs to be like a Hippocratic oath for product, and likely even if you're building
Yeah.
platforms and tools and what you use with it. Are you hearing those kind of concerns as well?
Yeah, I think that I think there's the skeptics who really want to look at this in a realistic and pragmatic
Hmm.
way and say, okay, this technology has limitations to it. We need to understand that and we need to account for that. I think that there are other skeptics who just have written off the technology for any number of reasons. People who say, oh, the only thing AI is doing is it's creating slop, I think are
Hmm.
missing the point. Like it's not something that's going to cause the end of humanity, so let's not overhype it, but it's
Uh-huh.
also something that's having a profound impact on a lot of areas of
Hmm.
product. And so to limit it and say, oh no, it's just for slop, or the latest thing is the MIT report that says 95% of companies are failing in terms of their AI efforts, so clearly this is like dead on arrival. I don't think that's the case, right? There are
Yeah.
things that we are doing today that were 2 years ago, 3 years ago science fiction. They make you a
Uh-huh.
lot faster. They enable things that were not possible before. And it's important to be pragmatic about that and understand what
Yeah.
opportunities that creates, and also what things that we need to solve for as a result. I think the trust and safety thing is an important one. The fact that we're talking about AI ethics, I think, is good. To some extent, I think it's a little bit misplaced in the sense that, for me, just in terms of overall safety, generative AI is not as concerning as consumptive AI. We've lived in a world where we're surrounded by AI feeds that basically just operate on engagement. And I think that is having a profound impact on kids, on everyone
Yeah.
today. That's where a lot of the safety issues are. So for people who are worried about some of the things specific to Gen AI, yes, we need to be worried about that. But there's a bigger problem that is right underneath our nose that needs to be solved. And I think is more important than a lot of the stuff that some of the work around AI ethics for Gen AI, um, you know, is misplaced compared to work that we need to do to really understand feeds and information bubbles and things of that sort.
I appreciate that perspective, especially since you've had lots of consumer apps, right? My world
Yep.
has been B2B, and so it's a little bit different than B2C apps as well. And but you do hear a lot about it, and as well, one as a human, but as a parent also.
Yeah.
I think about
100%.
what
I've
am
got
I?
two teen girls, so it's like daily.
Yeah, what oh, well, yes, okay, I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, so I'm a slightly different.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about YouTube Kids and what gets shown with YouTube Kids as well. There are lots of topics around AI, and AI kind of represents transformation. There's just profound and sometimes violent transformation everywhere right now in terms of industries, layoffs. There is just mass upheaval everywhere at the personal level, at the professional level, business, right? Macro. And that was one of the reasons I started the podcast. People grappling with change, and because it wasn't just one thing, but it was profound and it was everywhere. People seem to be struggling with some of those mental models about how to think about change and transformation, or they hear something on someone else's podcast and they assume that that's who they have to be. And this reminder of like, there's no one right way
Yeah.
to navigate all of this as it relates to career transformation. So we talked about AI. I know lots of people are reflecting on their careers either because layoffs had happened, they were either affected, people they knew were affected, right? They're looking everywhere and it's this moment of either voluntary self-reflection or forced upon involuntary
Yeah.
self-reflection. You've made a lot of pivots in your career and you had worked at very large companies and then you had taken a step to founding and creating your own company as well. Are there any principles or ideas or themes that stood the test of the various transitions? I know there are some things that you learned about, say, decision making that were very different from large enterprise to small, but is there anything in the career transition that did hold throughout all those different pivots that you look back and you're like, yeah, that principle held true?
Yeah. I think specifically for product, it's how important the customer is. That
Mm,
is ultimately the ground truth. Are you solving for them? Do they value their product? Can they live without it? Do they need to have it in their lives? All of that is, when you're at a big company, it's easy to lose touch with customers. There's sort of like an old way of doing user research where you do these big user research studies, maybe once a quarter. You spend a lot of money on them. Somebody creates a 200 slide deck that gets distributed, you have a meeting on it, and then nobody thinks about it again.
mhm,
And, talking to your customers every quarter or every couple of quarters just, can't be the case, especially given how things are moving, how quickly
mhm,
things are moving now. I think startups have the benefit of they kind of have no choice in terms of talking to customers. They have to talk to their customers. A lot of founders are doing
mhm,
customer support. You're really close to signal. And that's one of the reasons I think startups often disrupt bigger companies because they are
mhm,
closer to that signal. But
uh-huh,
it's remarkable how quickly you can lose sight of that once something starts working, or potentially have conversations, but sort of replace what you're hearing with what you want to be true versus what you're actually hearing. And so, whether or not you're in a larger organization, managing a big product that millions of people are using, and you've got a whole team that's trying to understand and evolve, or you're, one person or a couple of people in a room trying to create something great, that customer signal is vital, and it's the thing that separates success from not.
mhm. Is there anything for you personally in making the choice? Because there's that, right, there's always that transition, right? There's the moment before you actually make the decision, the meantime, and then you start the new thing,
Yeah.
right? There's always that transition period. Is there anything for you in how you thought about and knowing it's time to make a transition or why you made them? Because that's the question that a lot of people are asking. Do I just stay put where I am? Or, and some people do, because it's like we're about to grow and I can learn a whole lot of skills here, or it's something's not right, I need to go. Like, what for you personally in those transitions, was there a common theme of like, I know it's time to go and do something new?
And I have an article about this on my blog, actually. The analogy I use is you're not on a career ladder as much as you're on a career escalator. And so there are things that give you momentum, and there are things that could be headwinds as well. So ultimately, you could be on an escalator going the right way, in which case, every step you take feels a little bit easier than it should. You get promotions faster than you think that you would.
Mhm,
Your boss really appreciates the work that you're doing. Your work is always getting the benefit of the doubt. When it goes well, you're getting credit. When it's not going well, you get the benefit of the doubt and you get great feedback and you get the opportunity to improve. We've
mhm,
all been in situations where we love that environment. The environment is contributing. It's a tailwind. It's helping us achieve our goals. The reverse is you're trying to go up an escalator, moving in the wrong direction. And every step you take, it just feels like you're being carried back down. And
mhm,
that, basically illustrates the momentum of a company or an environment or a system that's working against you. And so no matter what you do, you feel like you're not getting credit or you're getting blame. You're not getting the promotions that you feel like you deserve. You're not getting great feedback for the work that you're doing. And all of us have been in that situation as well. The example I like to use here is like Steve Jobs got fired from Apple. So at some point, the system at Apple was working against him to the point where Apple felt like their future was better without him than with him. So all of us experience that in our careers. The first time it happens, it is overwhelming and disorienting, but it does happen, and it's worth taking a step outside your current situation and saying, am I in a situation that is working with me or against me? If I'm in a situation that's working with me, amazing. If I'm in a situation that's working against me, it might be time to look for something else, or to understand, what about the system is working against you and how can you change that. And so I think that's the big thing to think about. And it's not always like I've sort of positioned the escalator going the wrong way. It's not always a negative situation in terms of feedback or recognition. It could just be that where that particular role is going is not where you want to go. And it's diverging. And so the way to move faster is to hop from the lane that you're on into another lane. And so I think that's a really important thing to think about when to make a transition. Another framework I really like for this is Bengali Kaba has a great post called, I forget exactly the title, but the framework is impact equals environment times skills. And that highlights that
Mm.
as an individual, you have a set of skills that you bring to the table, amplified or attenuated by the environment that you're in. And that ultimately is the thing that produces your impact. And so if you're not having the impact that you want, it could be that you need to improve your skills. It could be
Mhm.
that you need to change your environment. And if you are having the impact that you want, it's also helpful to say what part of this is me, and then what part of this is the environment that I'm in. I've known people that are in amazing roles, they're doing really well, but they want to change because they want to move even faster, and then they
Mhm.
find they're facing a lot of headwinds in the new company because they just don't have the support system that they had in the
Mhm.
old company.
I've encouraged people when this comes up to think about what is it you believe that your job should be and what role does it play in your life? And I sometimes think we put a lot of pressure that our career is everything and that one
Yeah,
job
for
needs
sure.
to be all things, just like sometimes, we do with our spouse or our friends or whatnot. And that recognition of no, you might need more than one thing to fill all that you want out of your career and your self-actualization. And, sometimes a job is for a paycheck for a
Yeah,
period of time. And that's what you
which
need.
is
And
fine.
that can be valid, and then you can create something on the side and you can grow in other ways, or you can get those experiences that you're looking to have, and it doesn't always have to be in the job also. So I
Yeah,
always kind of challenge people, like, what do you believe your job should be? Because I think we all know it's not going to be the thing forever, and yet we treat it as if it might be
100%. Yeah.
forever.
And then it's easy. There are certain things that are forever, right? Like your family's forever, your friends are
Yes.
forever, ideally. And so, it's important to ask, is it getting in the way of other things that are important? And everything about, I think, just work in the US, especially in the tech industry, is about getting you fully committed to the job that you're in and
Mhm.
giving everything that you have, which sometimes is great. And other times it can be sort of the wrong way to think about investing your time and your energies.
Whenever I read your posts, your articles, hear you on podcasts, I always appreciate that you put frameworks in place. Like, that works well for me. I like synthesizing different ideas that you can apply to lots of different stuff. Do you have any framework or piece of advice that you give most often? One that you give most often, and which piece of advice do people ignore that you think they should not be ignoring?
Oh, those are both good questions. I think to the point of frameworks, the thing I often encourage people to do is think about take an idea or take a problem and create your own framework. And the very start of that is just to think about two different concepts related to that idea. And then ask yourself, how are they related? Like, are they on a spectrum? If I think about, a company, right? There's profit and there's expenses. And I can think about those two things separately, or there's revenue and there's expenses. And I can think
Mhm.
about those two things separately and solve for them. The really important thing there is creating distinctions, because it's easy with a complicated idea or problem area to get overwhelmed by it. And I think a framework, the value is not so much in that it gives you the answer, it's the value is in it helps you divide and conquer. It says, here's a set of 3 or 5 concepts related to this particular area. Here's how you could start to bucket some thinking around those into those different concepts and think about how those concepts relate. And so it helps you to divide and conquer the problem. And so when people are overwhelmed, they don't know what direction to go in. Sometimes there's an off the shelf framework that you can take, but sometimes you can just build your own way
Mhm.
of thinking about it by starting to segment the different ideas. And then in terms of advice that people don't take,
Or they should take more often, or they like
yeah,
just yeah.
I think the biggest one has to do with like how you succeed in an organization. And it is really high performers, especially early on in their career, are very heads down and are focused on how do I create as much of an impact in this organization as possible, feeling like if I create the impact, then I will get credit for that. And that's
Mm,
often the case earlier in your career because the person that you're reporting into is really close to the work. And so when they see the impact, they'll understand the work that went into it and they'll give you credit for it. But as you get more and more senior, especially once you as a functional leader, like a product leader, are reporting into a generalist like a CEO or someone else in the
mhm,
organization, a COO, those people don't know your line of work as well. And so when you make an impact, they don't actually by default know the work that went into it. And so whether or not they give you credit for it is kind of a question mark because they don't understand the inputs as well. And
mhm,
it becomes increasingly important for people to spend time both making an impact as well as making sure that they get credit for that impact. And that's not
mhm.
just a matter of like hoarding credit for credit's
Yeah.
sake. The recognition for you and for your team is the thing that ultimately builds political capital and support within the organization and helps you move more quickly. And that idea, it's not just true in a large organization, it's also true at a startup if you have investors or board members or other
Mhm,
people that you're working with. And so that combination of be heads down, make an impact, but also recognize that just because you made an impact, it doesn't by default mean that you'll get recognized for it. So spend an appropriate amount of time getting recognition. That's not a selfish thing to do, especially if you're a leader. It's actually a
mhm,
selfless thing to do because it's the thing that will make sure your team gets credit and make sure
mhm.
that your team has the support that they need to have a bigger impact and to get the resources and the alignment and the support that they need.
So I hear my listeners right now saying, "How do I do that without sounding like it's all about me?"
Yeah. I think
Because you
one of
have
the
those people that have no problem with self-promotion, and then people that are like, "Oh,
yeah,
I don't wanna be seen as self-promoting," and it's that balance of what is advocating for yourself versus it's like me, 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 me. Do you ever give people any tips of how to navigate that maybe discomfort?
Yeah, I think the first one is to not be so uncomfortable with it, right? Self promotion isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you want a promotion, you have to do some self promotion. That's part of what goes into it. Two is to recognize that actually, especially within product, where you're representing not just yourself, you're representing other people, engineers, designers. You're representing people that might be reporting directly into you, other
Mhm,
people that contributed to the product. Getting recognition is part of not just getting credit for yourself, but giving credit to the team and making sure that, everyone
mhm,
understands the role that they have. Sometimes in product, someone will help you from a different organization and they'll do it just because they want the product to succeed or just because they want to do the right thing for the company and it won't be in their job spec. And so if you don't get credit for the initiative and give that credit to the team, it goes entirely unnoticed. I think the one is to understand it's not by default a bad thing. And two is to give credit to your team and really good leaders. If you spend the time making sure that your team gets recognized, they'll connect the dots and they'll recognize you as well. So it
mhm,
doesn't have to be like a very, me type of thing. At the same
mhm,
time, if you feel like you're not getting the recognition, it's okay to promote, to advocate for the role that you played. If you don't do it very often, and if you when you do it, there's real impact underlying, that's
mhm.
great. The other thing to think about, and this is part of managing up, is getting recognition for yourself is also getting recognition for your manager, your leader, your CEO,
Mm,
because when they can talk to their stakeholders about the impact that the company is making, that's good for them as well. So it's a benefit, company wide to recognize the wins and to learn from the things that might not have worked
yeah.
out the way that you wanted. And that's not a bad thing. That's a really good thing. And so, a success that nobody sees may have some like mild impact, but it's going to have a really much bigger impact if people learn from it, if people recognize
Mhm.
it, if people celebrate it.
I love that shift. One, it's the kind of switching the belief. It's okay to advocate for yourself, right?
Yeah.
This is not a volunteer gig.
Yeah.
There's
For
a
sure.
win-win here too. And so hopefully having the psychological safety and forum to talk about what your contributions are and be able to speak to that. But I like your framing too of, in some ways, highlighting the problems that needed to be solved and what you've done and impact you individually, but as a team is actually an act of service to other people. Because I find people that
It
are
really
kind
is.
of
Yeah.
nervous about self promotion, that they're worried they're doing something to other people. But if you reframe it, that it's actually an act of service to amplify your colleagues and your team members, and that it helps leadership. I think that's a very different come from.
Yeah.
I encourage people, when you're working in larger organizations and you have to collaborate, especially if it's a highly matrixed organization. And so people might not know, right, everything that's going on. When you have those stakeholders, make sure you are building a talk track. Know the narrative that is going to be said about your work and giving people talking points so that way they say it. Like, if that's the best way to avoid like the unintended sales commit and that like you are not doing something for something,
100%.
let
Yeah.
them know what you are doing for them so they can focus on that. And not just, obviously, you want to also elevate the things that aren't working in strategic asks, but understand there's like your small niche of stakeholders, but then who are the secondary and tertiary stakeholders to make sure you have a talk track for them as well.
I love the talk track framing because people are going to talk about your work and it's up to you to figure out how do I make sure that they're talking about it in the right way, because you're the
Mhm,
one who's closest to the work, so you're in the best position to create
mhm.
that talk track. If other people in the org are guessing, they may get things wrong, they may get things right.
So, related to collaboration, you talk about from a large company perspective to a startup, but I think it probably also relates career wise as well about decision making. And you highlight that there's a difference between velocity and latency. And can you talk about the distinction between those two and where you notice the difference if you're in a large corporation, smaller corporation, and maybe your own personal decision making
Yeah,
speed and
absolutely.
not getting stuck in analysis paralysis?
So when I was at TripAdvisor, the CEO had a sign that he put on his door. It was over a decade old when I was there. That just said "Speed wins." It was a handwritten sign. It was his reminder to the company that if we move fast, we have some inherent advantages.
Mhm,
And he would, for every new hire cohort that came in, he would do a session on what does it mean for speed to win.
mhm,
Um, and over the years that we were there, I got to see like there were some really significant advantages to moving fast. But there was also somewhat of a backlash. There was this idea that, yeah, speed wins, but that just means I need to work harder. I'm going to stay late. I'm not going to see my family. You need more resources. It's not just a matter of speed. And I started to think about like, well, what's the delta between really effective speed and speed that can be overwhelming or disempowering or unrealistic?
yeah,
In looking at the teams that were very effective, there's an important difference. There's two components of speed. One is velocity and the other is latency. So velocity is how much work are you getting done? Latency is what is the time from hypothesis to insight. And
mhm,
so, a team can always move faster in the sense that they can do more work, but that may or may not help. It is absolutely 100% the case that big companies move faster than small companies from a velocity perspective
mhm,
because they just have more resources. And so they're doing more things. But small companies disrupt big companies all the time. And that's because velocity is not the key factor. Latency is the key factor. The time it takes them to go from, I think that there's something interesting here, to getting a test out in the market or creating value for their customer is super short. And
mhm,
so, a company that is big, 10,000 people, that has a quarterly planning cycle was like, hey, in 2023, AI looks like it's a thing. Let's put it into our 2024 annual plan. Those companies are at a major disadvantage compared
mhm,
to a company that was able to say, actually, AI is a thing. Let's interrupt the whole organization, reorient it around it, and make sure that in the next couple of months, we're going to move the needle on it.
mhm,
So latency is really key. One of the litmus test questions that I ask PMs or companies that I'm working with is if you knew that the copy on a button in the product was going to convert much better if it said something else than what it says today, like you want to change the copy from check prices to reserve table, how long would it take you to do that? And at some companies, it's like, oh, yeah, we can do that tomorrow. Other companies, it might be 2 weeks. Other companies, it might be a month. And so that litmus test of how long does it take to get the simplest possible impactful change through the system is a measure of latency. And if you are working on a latency of, getting things out few times a week or every couple of weeks, that means in a given year, you might have 20 at bats or 50 at bats to be able to test an idea and figure out what works. If, on
Mhm.
the other hand, you're only shipping changes every month, you've only got 10 to 12 times to
Yeah.
learn during the course of a year. And being able to learn faster compounds really, really quickly.
You know, I'm noticing this interesting tension right now across l- organizations for different industries, but people are realizing we need to go faster, right? And that's what I say. We need to go faster. It's progress, I think, not saying necessarily do more, but focusing. But what you were talking about with change, I'm noticing this tension of how do we go from hypothesis to experiment and learn from it quicker and quicker and quicker. But there's this tension when it's involving people. It's not the same set of people that know how to work together to test and move faster and experiment faster. But when people are being treated as widgets, that they can move their just general head count, and then you run into kind of the concept of whenever you have groups of people that come together, the forming, storming, norming, performing tension, and it feels like teams and companies and departments are constantly, you know, forming and storming, and they're never norming, and then they move on to the next thing. And so it's this, I'm feeling and hearing this tension of, yeah, we get it. We need to go faster. We're moving people to work on the highest priority things, but people are still people. And it seems to be like having a harder time shortening that cycle. Like, yes, we need to make the experimentation cycle shorter, but also like how we form together
Yeah.
quicker. Are you noticing that tension? And do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. I think one of the things I've been thinking about is there's certain things that are now moving at AI speed, and there's certain things that are still moving at human speed. And so you have this very
Mm,
big differential between the velocity of how quickly you can build a piece of software versus how quickly a customer is going to adopt it, right? Because you might
mhm,
get the feature to them seeing the feature, understanding the feature, deciding they want to use it, learning about it, figuring out whether or not they can basically incorporate it into their workflow. That's going to go at the same speed that it always did. So you might have built a feature in a day, but it's going to take 3 weeks to adopt. That same thing
mhm,
is true for teams internally. The teams might be able to move a lot faster in terms of we can write docs faster, we can create designs faster, we can write software
mhm,
faster. But can we work together? Can we collaborate well enough? Are we motivated to solve the problem? Do we even understand what we're trying to do? Those are still
mhm,
things that are working at human speed, not AI speed. And I don't see that changing, right? These are basic human. I think the over optimists around AI are like, well, AI is going to take care of all that stuff. I don't think
mhm,
that's the case. And what it means is that it spotlights really key parts of the things that PMs do that are important. So building gets faster, but customer insight is going to take about the same amount of time as before. Product
mhm,
strategy is going to take about the same amount of time as before. Leadership is going to take about the same amount of time as
mhm,
before. And so knowing when it's not even necessarily a bottleneck, but just knowing what is the nature of the problem you're solving and can AI accelerate it is important to understand where to put your emphasis and not be impatient about, I just wish everything was going 10x faster. Because I think the
mhm,
companies that do that and shortchange how long it's going to take customers to understand the product, how long it's going to take the sales team to sell it, how long it's going to take to get the team wrapped around it, are going to find that, yeah, they ship things really, really quickly, but it's kind of spaghetti against the wall. Their hit rate's going to go down.
So let's maybe do two last questions. I think one, I'd like to talk about strategy and goals, given kind of what time of year we're in, and then maybe we can
Yep.
go do the personal experimentation. So we are in this time of year. Most companies, depending on your fiscal year, you're in some form of next year fiscal planning. You're switching quarters, and this is where we have mission, we have vision, we have strategy docs, we have goals, and OKR. Like everything kind of comes up this time of year. And in theory, you're looking at it every month or every quarter. I want your hot take this time of year. Be the advisor out to the internet. Like what to think about during this time. And here's the common pitfall. Please don't step in it, friends.
Yeah, I think that two things. One, goals are not a strategy. Saying you want to increase revenue by 20% not a strategy. And then the other thing is your your roadmap should not be defined to hit your goals. Your roadmap should be defined on what creates value for your customers. And then your goal should measure whether or not your roadmap is helping you make progress on your strategy. The analogy I like to use is if you say, hey, I want to go on a road trip from LA to San Diego, that's the thing. That's your destination. That's your roadmap. You don't say, I want to drive 200 miles and then I'll see what happens, right? Just setting the
Mm,
goal of driving 200 miles is not going to get you to your destination. Same with setting a goal of increasing revenue by 10%. That's not going to get you to your destination. It might be that the way that you created 10% of additional value for your customers was the right way strategically, but it's often the case that it was the wrong way. And it might actually get you into some local maxima where, you're optimizing for something that is not long-term strategically what you need. So ultimately, goals are the end of a strategic process, not the start of it. The start of a strategic process is what's our mission? What change are we trying to bring into the world? What change are we trying to bring to customers? What's our strategy? What are the competitive advantages that we have that lead to a really rigorously logical plan that helps us achieve that mission? What's our roadmap? So, what are the pieces that we need to put in place to achieve that strategy and that mission? And then finally, what are our goals? What is the evidence that the strategy that we put in place was the right strategy because we were able to make
mhm,
progress on things that we wanted to measure? And so that
mm,
inside out approach to strategy is very controversial. People are like, no, of course you start with goals and then figure out what your roadmap is to hit them. But I would advocate actually more important than metrics is logic, is being able to think really deeply about your position in the market, bring to bear all the human thinking faculties that you have and figure out the right path. Because if we're just treating a company as like a mathematical engine of here's the goal and here's the knob that we're going to turn, that can work for a period of time, but it won't necessarily work forever. A good example here is I really like the example of Home Away and Airbnb. Home Away was
mhm.
in the vacation rental space far before
Yeah.
Airbnb was. They
Mhm,
said, we're a scientific company. We're going to hit our goals. They set goals of increasing their supply 30% a year and increasing revenue by a similar amount. And they were just really good at
mhm,
nailing it. And so they were on a very clear and consistent growth trajectory. And then Airbnb came along and said, actually, we can rethink the entire vacation rental space and frame it not as a transaction between a property owner and someone who wants to rent, but really between a host and a guest. So they reframe the transaction in a much more human way and then reframe how people think about vacation rentals from, hey, I just need a big place with a kitchen to actually, this is a way I can live like a local. There was no goal that was going to measure the qualitative difference in the
mm,
missions between Home Away and Airbnb. But they did hit on something that from a mission standpoint was really resonating, from a strategy standpoint was really resonating. And even though Home Away was very good at hitting their goals, Airbnb quickly eclipsed them in terms of revenue and inventory in the years after they launched. So I always encourage people to think, yes, we got to think mathematically. Finance is a mathematical thing. But even more important than the numbers are the mission, the value
mhm,
that you're creating, the more qualitative things, the more logical things.
mm. I think people need to go back and re-listen to that one. That's one to come back to and make sure, kinda catch yourself on, because it can be so easy to fall into
There is, yeah.
certain patterns and ways of being. So, maybe to wrap up, is there
Cool.
anything that you are currently experimenting with? You can't do the final, "This is where it ended, and I can give you the framework and the thought process," but is there anything that you are currently experimenting and thinking about, and how are you going about that experiment?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is so I've got two daughters, so I have a 16-year-old and a 15-year-old. They both go to the same school now. They were in different schools before. They're both very different. One is like super academic and she wants to go to Harvard, and the other one is really into music, super creative. And one of the early things that we made a decision on, which I think was a good one, was to keep them as far away from social media as possible. So they didn't get phones until recently. They were never allowed to use YouTube. They still don't have Snap or Instagram. We
Mhm,
had thought at some point they would be like, no, actually, we need to be on Instagram because we got to be able to talk to our friends. But I think a lot of parents have made a similar decision. And so there's enough
mhm,
kids that don't have it that it's been okay. They're now using the devices more. Screen time's definitely a problem. So we weren't like perfect about it. But I think it helped during their most formative years keep them off of those platforms and really just focus on like having fun with each other, having fun with their friends. And now an interesting question is like, should we what's the stance on AI? Do we want them using AI? Do we want them kind of
Mm,
thinking about using AI to potentially help for homework from an academic standpoint? The schools are
mhm,
like, no, you shouldn't be using AI at all. And we've really leaned into it. So they have access to ChatGPT and the Claude and the image generation models. They're using it. And I think so far it's been really good. I think from a technology standpoint, because it's generative, it's much more creative and I think much more of a value add than some of the more consumptive things. And so
mhm.
far, I don't know where that experiment is going to go and whether or not we should have kept them further away from it or not. But they enjoy using it. It's been really good creatively for them. It's fun. It's sometimes silly. It's sometimes really helpful. So I think it's been positive for them.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I think it's an experiment we're all in the middle of going through right now.
Well, it's great that it's an experiment you're doing while you're still at home to help be guides
Yeah,
for them versus, "Bye-bye, you're off at college and go experiment on your own."
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really important. Like giving your kids the ability to and I saw this with myself growing up, like be able to fail when they have a safety net and experiment when they have a safety net and do things that are not
Mhm.
great when they have a safety net is better than sheltering them and then they go to college and then there's no safety net.
What would a home run episode look like to you? Like, what message would you want people to walk away with? I just wanna make sure we've captured that message idea, either a call to action, but thing that you wanna make sure that you're putting out there with this episode.
I think the biggest thing that I see is PMs have a lot of FOMO with AI. Like there's fear that there's something incredible happening that they don't understand, and that's creating some like existential angst for a lot of folks. Who are like, what is the future of my career going to look like? I talked to someone recently at an event, and he said, "Do you think in the next 2 to 3 years, 30 to 50% of PMs will be out of jobs?" And I was like, "No, I don't think that's the case. I don't think we need to
Mm,
worry about that." But that's the sort of topic that's on people's minds. And so I'd love for them to come out of this feeling like, AI is something they can get their head wrapped around. It's going to take a little bit of time, but there's not some big secret that they're missing out on. There are great resources out there, and spending time on it will set you up for success in your future career. And so it's really good to do. At the same time, I don't think there's some existential threat to product. You've chosen a really good career. You're going to be really successful with it. There's always going to
mhm.
be ups and downs, but the more that you love it, the more that you understand customers, the more that you're willing to have a growth mindset, the more you'll be set up to succeed now and well into the future.
And with that, Ravi Mehta, mic drop. I think that's a great way to end. Thank you so
Awesome.
much
Yeah, this has been great.
personally for all that you do for product leaders, for the product community. I'm just really grateful that you took the time today.